A few Zoom tips before we get started. Please keep your lines on mute, and you can ask questions and add comments by typing into the chat box. Dr. Bolling would like the training to be interactive, so feel free to ask questions and he will stop and answer them, as well as adding some comments throughout the training, and he will answer them as he goes. Please keep your video off. And if you have trouble hearing or seeing the presentation, please let us know in the chat box. And now I will stop sharing my screen and let Dr. Bolling share his to start the presentation.
Thanks, Alex. It's good to see everybody online today. As Alex said, I'm Chris Bolling, and I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Hopefully, I'm going to be at the same spot where Alex left off. There we go. So as Alex said, I'm Chris Bolling. I'm actually a general pediatrician at Pediatric Associates in Northern Kentucky in the Cincinnati suburbs. So I'm one of those bi-stated people. My practice is in the Kentucky suburbs, but I live in Cincinnati, and lots of my patients are on both sides of the river. I also have a lot of Indiana patients as well, so we kind of go all over the place. I have nothing to disclose. I will not be discussing any off-label uses. I'm a member of the Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime Steering Committee, and I'm current Obesity Task Force Chair for the Kentucky chapter of the AAP. Some of you may know me too. I was also Section Chair for AAP and Obesity, and that term just ended last year. So as Alex said, I am really, you'll see this is a topic that really lends itself to a lot of crosstalk. So I'd really like to encourage folks to participate by firing us questions as we go along. We have a lot so I have some fairly dense slides, and you may have questions that come up as we go along. Certainly, if you have questions, I'm sure other people will have similar ones. So please send us questions as we move along, and we'll be happy to address them as we go through them. And I'd also love to hear everybody else's take on things, because a lot of this was developed with the work of other pediatricians and their ideas. By the conclusion of this activity, as I said, the objectives are laid out. We're going to kind of talk about nutrition, activity, and mental health and how it relates to the COVID epidemic. We're going to give you an opportunity to figure out ways to positively address it. Also, I think there's some interesting tie-ins to some of the work that we all have been doing in ACEs. And I want to also give you some nutrition resources and some other resources that might be of help for you. So with no further ado, let's kind of get into this. So as it happens, when Alex approached me about talking on this topic, at first I was like, well, there's not a whole lot out there yet, Alex. I'm not sure what we're going to find on this. And is there really enough to do a webinar on it? Well, that was all I needed to say, because all of a sudden, lots of things started hitting the press. You know, it just takes a little while for people to kind of catch up to what's going on. And then fortunately, in this interconnected world that we have, people were able to share things pretty rapidly. And so a lot of this is very late breaking. In fact, one piece of this, and I'm going to start off with stuff that happened 24 hours ago. It was embargoed until 9 a.m. yesterday, but the AAP released two statements that are very helpful in this effort, and that I think are really kind of address the topic that we have at hand today. The first one was a quick policy statement, and these aren't in the true AAP, big, huge, gigantic policy statements, but these came out for rapid response to the pandemic. The first one is supporting healthy nutrition and physical activity during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second one was more specific for my area, which is obesity management and treatment during COVID-19. And both of these are really great kickoffs for us to discuss today. You can get the resources. Alex will send these out to everyone. You can click on these two links to get these directly if you haven't already gotten them in some of your AAP mailers. I know they're out there circulating currently, but if you need them, here are the links for them, and Alex will be providing these to you as well. But the first one, let's take a look at it. The first one is on supporting healthy nutrition and physical activity. The background on this, and we're going to talk more about this in depth. The pandemic has really compromised nutrition and physical activity. The data really indicates that it really, no surprise here, but really it is compromising nutrition and physical activity. They're worse than they were before we hit the pandemic. One of the big issues is access to nutrition, probably linked more to school availability than anything else, but access to nutrition has been compromised. It's also linked to, because there's definitely some issues on food insecurity. There are a lot of people that are dependent on getting food outside the home have been affected by this. Opportunity for physical activity, clearly because of a suspension of lots of different activities and restricted access, has been negatively affected. Health inequities are worsening. What we know about the COVID crisis is that it affects communities of color, it affects minority communities, lower SES communities disproportionately. It's the same group of people that get affected by obesity, but our health inequities are getting more yawning than they were before. The role of the pediatrician is to support families and to acknowledge special circumstances and special challenges that exist for our particular patients, but also at this peculiar time. So what are the recommendations in this particular statement? Well, there's sort of three things, and it goes around assessment and screening, counseling, and knowledge and skill base. So what the statement says is that at all well visits, we should continue to assess and screen for nutrition and physical activity disruptions attributable to the pandemic, and screen for obesity onset or worsening during the pandemic. So point one, don't stop screening. Probably now more than ever, because these background influences are really negatively affecting wellness. I think we definitely are seeing it, in mental health issues. It's really dramatically affecting nutrition and activity, disproportionately to other things. The second recommendation is that our counseling should be tailored using positive strategies that build on family strengths, emphasizing maintenance of healthy lifestyle and how to mitigate obesity onset in the face of an increasingly obesogenic environment of the pandemic. I'm going to ask some of you to respond. I'd love to hear some responses if you're seeing what I'm seeing. Completely anecdotal, but it sure seems like that the weight gain has been very real during this pandemic. Kids who've not had problems with it in the past. Some kids who are kind of holding their own, but definitely I've seen those kids where the trouble with weight gain has really increased. And some kids that it's never been an issue before have started crossing percentiles on us. I had one trainer refer to, you hear a lot of things about the pandemic pounds and things like that. I heard someone call it, for adults, called it the COVID-19. So hopefully it's not 19 pounds, but it's definitely kids are experiencing that. And like I said, I'd love to hear some responses. Alex is going to be monitoring the chat box, so I'd love to hear what other people are finding as well. But there are going to be specific things. Some of the counseling strategies that we all know to use are more important than ever at this time. The third recommendation, kind of an interesting one, and it deserves a little bit of a deeper dive, is that pediatricians should become familiar with the complex and interconnected factors that lead to these obesogenic issues and how these factors are affected by the pandemic. They should also be able to practice practice specific skills and knowledge. And I'm actually pulling out my paper because it's hot off the presses, haven't gotten a chance to really review it too much. But what they mean by specific areas of knowledge and skill is techniques of lifestyle behavior counseling. So some of the things that we know about with counseling from motivational interviewing and other places, with promotion of parenting skills, monitoring and promotion of social emotional health, understanding and locating community nutrition and activity resources. And I think there's a big asterisk here for the things that are still open, and treatment options for obesity. Those things should still be functioning. For those of us, I've always stated, I think on every Ohio AAP webinar I've ever hosted, we are blessed with some amazing children's hospitals. And to my knowledge, everybody's obesity treatment programs that existed before are still moving along currently. The other special knowledge and skill that this statement actually calls out is really being good at screening for mood disorders and experiences of childhood trauma. So, if you're still doing things to screen for ACEs, keep doing those. Those are going to probably be more productive. And with the schools out of the equation in a lot of circumstances, pediatricians assume a bigger, more unique role. The other issue is mood disorders. Those of us who are already screening with the PHQ-2, PHQ-9, and the GAD, the General Anxiety Index, those need to be continued. So those are the three recommendations for assessment and screening, counseling, and use of specific knowledges and skills. The second statement really calls out obesity management and treatment in particular. The background on this one is sort of the same as the previous one. Children's, adolescents, and families with obesity constitute a large population at risk for severe COVID-19. So, we're talking about the same populations. Again, the communities of color, the communities that face other adversity are the ones that are most affected by COVID-19. They're the ones that are most affected by obesity and nutrition and activity issues. Obesity-related and a little different twist on this is that obesity-related comorbidities are particularly related to adverse outcomes in COVID-19. So when we're talking about things like type 2 diabetes, asthma, obesity itself, these are things that have been linked, certainly in the adult population, with worsened outcomes. Many of the risk factors that result in weight gain are present in pandemic, same underlying things like I mentioned before. And saying it one more time, there's an increased risk for worsening and onset in the pandemic. So what are the recommendations for obesity care and obesity treatment during the pandemic? Recommendation 1 is to continue to assess all patients for obesity during the pandemic. Keep using your BMI percentiles, keep measuring BMI, keep having the discussion. You should be maintaining all obesity treatment as much as you're able. This is not, this is essential care. Follow-ups are needed, comorbidity is needed. This is actually, I didn't even really mention this, but for those of you like us who have really embraced telehealth, obesity management visits are pretty darn good as a telehealth platform. I mean, a lot of times, I think they're almost better in some ways because it takes the focus off the scale. I'm an obesity medicine provider who still wants to, I still measure weight and I do it in a discrete, try to do it in as discreet a way as we can and not make it the focus of the visit. But still, you can accomplish a lot without even having the weight. I mean, because a lot of times you're looking for those positive behaviors that have not yet been reflected in the patient's weight. Tailor your assessment and counseling to address the pandemic is the third piece of it. What does that mean? That means special attention to healthy lifestyles that you can hang your hat on. You want to be paying special attention to mental health, being non-judgmental regarding COVID risk. I think there's a little bit of COVID stigma, like there is weight stigma. Like, oh, you're someone who, we see all sorts of, we saw it early in the pandemic with people of Asian descent being discriminated against. So we just need less of that, honestly. Be paying attention to family stress, be alert to disordered eating, and also really be paying attention to the social determinants of health. For those of you who are members on the section on obesity, you've probably seen some reactions to this statement that came out yesterday, a lot of positive reactions. And that was, probably the biggest piece was this point number 2. Keep seeing these kids, keep getting them the treatment they need. And that includes even the high level treatments, like the patients with severe obesity who need to be seen at an obesity treatment center, the patient who needs to have a bariatric surgery evaluation, the patient who might be a candidate for medications. Another thing that happened over the weekend, it seems like 2020, it seems like everything is happening all at once, all the time. One of the other things that happened was another medication got approved for use in adolescents for weight management, and another one is right behind it, one that's actually that we think is going to be very a positive development. So like I said, the chatter on the SUB, the section on obesity listserv has been about, like, we need, new treatments are coming online. These kids are sick. We need to continue to be treating them. So that's kind of a long-winded description of these two statements. I was wondering, Alex, do we have any questions in the chat box on this?
We have a few statements. So we had one statement that said that they were definitely seeing abnormal weight gain in more children than ever before and less activity, and that our PMP education program will be addressing these specific knowledge and skills that are necessary. And then from the WIC clinic perspective in Ohio, it's been hard as a dietitian not being able to see kiddos as we've waived the measurement requirements to keep families' exposure low during COVID-19.
So are they saying that it's been harder to see them because they've not been coming in, or?
If Cindy can reply back in the chat box, because she stated that from the WIC clinic perspective. So I'm sure she could provide some more insight on that.
Okay, yes, because, I actually think in some ways, we're not getting updated measurements. That makes sense. That makes sense, Cindy. So yeah, so you don't have the measurements, which is true, but I do think sometimes, I don't know if you've experienced this, but a lot of our mental health providers have related to me that they've actually had better show rates because they're a little less dependent on transportation to get in. They're a little less dependent. There are fewer variables when they can do a video conference. So it's always dependent on technology too, which is certainly, it can be shaky at times. But yeah, it is, you lose that measurement piece, but boy, there still can be some good progress you can make. So let's kind of dive in here a little bit more about how is this really, we're going to get a little bit into the weeds here, which we've got some time, so let's do it. So how is COVID actually affecting our kids? What do we think is going on here? Well, first off, the way it's affecting our kids is, something I give thanks for every day as a general pediatrician, that our kids don't seem as severely affected. Now, having said that, we had our first, we had our 2-month-old with it, and we had a 4-month-old in our practice with it. We've had our first patient in the ICU with it. They do get sick, they do spread illness. So, but generally, it's not quite as severe, fortunately. What we really know is that the mental toll is very high on this. There's interruption in routine. There's fear of illness, which I think doesn't get stated very often for a lot of our more thoughtful kids. There's this guilt sometimes associated with it, with spreading illness and spreading it to other family members. I've had kids talking about that with me. There certainly is the isolation issue. I think we talk about all the other stuff too, like the increased screen time, et cetera. And really, I can't overstate the number of services that kids are losing, from nutrition to mental health services, that they're not getting by not going to school. For whatever your thoughts are on school, there's some interesting stuff out there. If you're familiar with Aaron Carroll, who's a pediatrician from Indianapolis, he writes under the name of the Incidental Economist in the New York Times. Had a really nice article. I'll give that to Alex to link if we can. But it was a really nice article on how we need to be thinking about school as an essential service. Like the wraparound services that kids get in schools really kind of make it more of a, we're very intent. It's really important to keep our small businesses going. It's important to keep the restaurants and bars afloat, however we need to keep them afloat. But, for kids, it's more than just throwing money at them. They really need the other support services. But Aaron's article on this was really a nice one. If you've ever read his stuff, he's a very thoughtful character. The other things that we know are that from the Kaiser Family Fund, in September, they did a nice summary on what's happening to kids during the pandemic, what's happening to children. In-person school does increase the risk. I mean, we know this. It's a matter of sort of measuring risks. Students who do not attend school face different risks than the kids who do. Both sets of students face challenges due to the disruption of routines. Children really experience, and we know this isn't rocket science, children experience the economic consequences disproportionately of the pandemic. We know that preventive and ongoing care are being delayed, and that minority and low income children are at the greatest risk. So this was a study, like I said, from the Kaiser Family Fund just a couple months back. Another way of looking at things, I think we're all familiar with adverse childhood experiences, but I'm also going to throw in another term for you, adverse community environments. Wendy Ellis, who's at the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University, also an Ohio native. She graduated from Walnut Hills High School here in Cincinnati. But Wendy really talks about both adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments, or a pair of ACEs. These are of special concern when you look in communities of color. They're disproportionately affected. So what does she really mean by this pair of ACEs, as opposed to just the ACEs that we've generally talked about, adverse childhood experiences? Well, she said, if you picture a tree and you picture adverse childhood experiences as those things sort of more in view, things that you can kind of get to. And then you look at the adverse community environments as being the underlying soil, the underlying roots, the root system, the things that sort of predisposes you just sort of organically toward things. So the above ground, we know things like maternal depression in the particular family, emotional sexual abuse, substance abuse, and we all know the great prevalence of all these things. Physical and emotional neglect, divorce, mental illness, etc. Incarceration, homelessness, domestic violence, harsh discipline, all those things are the ACEs that we're more familiar with as pediatricians. The adverse community environments are things like poverty, discrimination, community disruption, community lack of safety and violence, poor housing quality, poor housing affordability, lack of opportunity economically, lack of mobility socially, lack of social capital in general. And so what has happened during the pandemic? Well, during the pandemic, more things have piled on top up here, and potentially things that sort of are seeping into the groundwater if we don't get out of this thing quickly. Food insecurity has made a bigger inroad. Lack of access to healthcare has increased. Higher risk for medical complications due to chronic disease is on the rise. There's greater housing instability. There's lack of access for technology for school and work. And I'd say not only lack, but there's unequal access to technology for school and work. So this exacerbates some of the disparities that exist. For some, this housing instability thing is a really odd development. The cities in Ohio, I always sort of roll my eyes when people try to characterize our state as this homogenous red state or purple state or blue state or whatever you want to call it. And, our state is really diverse. Here in Cincinnati, we have an unbelievably hot real estate market right now. It's just crazy. The expensive houses go on the market and sell instantly. Like, it's the fastest turnover rate in the country currently. Meanwhile, our homelessness is increasing too. So we're experiencing this very bizarre sort of bimodal housing issue where affordability is going through the roof on one end, and the upper end market is doing very, very well. And then more and more people are homeless. It's just a really odd, unsettling sort of thing that really has this impression that the two sides of society are diverging more and more all the time. So, these are big, huge areas. So what can we do as pediatricians in our little world? Well, we can acknowledge that adults do bear the burden of disease from COVID, but we need to continue to fight for kids who are suffering, and albeit in different ways. We need to be alert in our practices. We need to continue to ask questions about ACEs and social determinants because they exacerbate all these challenges, and we need to offer practical steps in a non-judgmental way. Do we have any questions right now from anybody? Looks like we're clear. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, we're going to get into some specifics and some ideas for you and maybe some resources that you can look at. First, I want to give a shout out to my crew at Pediatric Associates in Northern Kentucky. We have an awesome group of pediatricians and nurse practitioners and MAs and front desk folks. So our population is more suburban than other populations, but we still have our rural poor, we still have our urban poor, we still have people across a variety of backgrounds. So even though we're a little more white bread than the country as a whole, we still are, we still have some diversity in our crew and our families who we serve. I will just say one comment that my partners, like I said, I want to give a shout out to them because they were instrumental in helping me. They were the first group, first crew of people that I went to and I said, help me figure this topic out because I'm talking with the Ohio AAP, my Ohio AAP peeps about this. They, to a person said, you know what, I feel like these well visits, when we first quit doing them, way back in March and April, when we said, okay, these are non-essential, no checkups. We feel like these checkups are more important than ever right now. And I would venture to say that I'm not alone in that. I just feel like we're uncovering everything we did before, if not more. And they feel really important. And honestly, this is the opportunity to talk about this stuff. I remember when we first started opening up, I had a lot of parents who said to me, like, I said, I really, I would say, like, I'm really glad you guys came out. We really think this is an important visit. And the parents were like, you and me both. I had a lot of things that have been built up, a lot of things that have come to my attention since I've been home with my kids. And it's just good to be out of the house. So, it is a really good opportunity and an important, a medically important, necessary thing to be doing. A lot of my partners at Pediatric Associates also said, this has been, because of the topics we're hitting on, because there's a lot of judgment around things, this is a great time to be using your MI skills and your open-ended questions. And you need to really be listening because you're going to get stuff back at these well visits. The well visit really is the linchpin in getting this information out to folks. So let's break it down into some specific ideas around nutrition, physical activity, and mental health topics. So for nutrition, let's start off. So, some of the things that I think that people really said that they're doing, again, these are a lot of the pediatricians from our crew, but pediatricians from around the country, some little ideas. Gardening. And what I mean by going Icelandic is, as you know, Ohio, sometimes we turn into Iceland as the season wears on. Try your hand at greenhouses. They're out there. You can try it. If you notice, a lot of our produce comes from Canada in the winter. They're coming from greenhouses. So get adventurous for those families that can do it. It's been a great experience for many of our families. Planning teen meal night where your teens are in charge of dinner. I don't have teens myself. I can't quite imagine it, but that's what some pediatricians have said they've recommended. Cooking together obviously has been a great idea for families. Encourage that as best you can. I've had families, this is not a suggestion. These next two suggestions are not suggestions from pediatricians, but are suggestions from families. One is they have theme night. So they really get, and it can be either an ethnic theme or it can be a theme like we're going to mimic our favorite restaurant, or we're going to mimic like having a Thanksgiving dinner in the middle of spring. So you can come up with themes on your own, or you can have things like we're eating all green foods tonight. So the themes are up to you, but themes seem to help keep some families get together. Mom's Diner. This is a great idea from a mom. What Mom's Diner is, she said, we wind up with all these leftovers and nobody likes leftovers. So this mom's idea was, what I do is I mock up a menu, and a quick menu that has a list of the variety of foods that are left over in the refrigerator, and they get to order off the menu of what they would like to have. So a much more creative way of helping clear out that fridge from the leftovers, but is Mom's Diner. There's a couple books out there and a couple of resources that I think are absolutely fantastic. We've had some families and pediatricians both recommend the Family Fit Plan. This is by a friend of mine and colleague. She took over for me as the chair of the section on obesity at AAP, Natalie Muth from San Diego. If you've not seen Family Fit Plan, it's a great time for it. It's a great resource. It's a book that really covers, I've got it on my shelf right over here next to me, but it has a great menu planning. It's got some great ideas for exercise and for getting in shape. Just a great little handout for your families that are motivated. If you don't already get Chop Chop, I'd recommend it. Now, we do not allow our magazines out in the waiting room anymore. And sometimes I think Chop Chop you kind of got lost amongst all the other sort of throwaway magazines. But if you're not familiar with Chop Chop, I would highly recommend you become familiar with it right away. It's great pandemic stuff. What it is, Chop Chop is put out by a woman named Sally Sampson, who's written some books with Natalie Muth, actually. But Sally puts together Chop Chop with funding from the New Balance Foundation, the shoe company. And it's all about cooking with kids and teaching kids kitchen skills. So it's about teaching them skills with knife skills. The last issue had one on how to safely use a box grater. These are actually really good recipes, and they're actually adult recipes, but there's always a kid component. And it really goes down to ages as young as, there's stuff in here for kids as young as 3 and 4. But there's also stuff in here that's very appropriate for teens. There's also games. I find actually, even though I can't put these in the waiting room, I get better uptake with these if I just have a stack of them with me and I'm handing them out to my families as I go along. You can get them for free if you go to chopchopmag.org. So chopchopmag.org, it's a great, great resource. I blast through these things. You get a shipment every quarter. And families can subscribe to it very easily. And my parents are kind of like, they're starting to look for it. I've been doing this for a few years now, and it's been great because of the amount of cooking that people are doing now. Let's talk a little bit about activity. Some of the ideas that people, again, a lot of these are from parents. Some of these are from pediatricians as well around the country and my practice, and families in my practice and other places. Camping, even in your own yard, or truly indoor camping, setting up an area in the basement or somewhere else. Obviously, some families do not have the luxury of having extra space, but doing indoor camping if you have a tent. Breaking exercise up into small increments. It's hard to go to the gym or hard to go when they're not even open. It was hard to go to certain parks. It's going to be harder to go to parks as the weather gets worse. But breaking your exercise up into smaller increments is a great way of kind of getting that in there, and also has the added benefit of managing to intrude a little bit on screen time. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to mimic what a lot of school systems do, where they have activity breaks built into the day. This is something you obviously never suggest, but getting a pet. When someone said this to me, I'm like, yeah, this is got to be the family's decision, not my decision. But certainly a family that's motivated, it's not a bad time. I know that dog adoption is way up in our practice, especially if you're trying to be at home and be able to train them. Really finding your local bike path. I'm amazed. Ohio's cities and areas have some really fantastic bike paths. I am still amazed how many families don't realize what's right in their neighborhood. And I would really recommend that you encourage that. The one that's close to me in town, to where I live in Cincinnati, is just amazing. I mean, everybody's out there safely distant, but it's a really great resource, and it connects you to all sorts of activity that's very safe and very positive. We've had some families, the ones some of the more hilarious ones that really cracked me up in our practice. Block party bingo with a megaphone, everybody out on their front yard with somebody with a megaphone calling out bingo from the front porch. We've also had some people that have created human foosball games where you have people in lawn chairs. You're not allowed to move from your lawn chair, and you have a large ball that you have to sit in your lawn chair and kick toward the goalpost. You get the idea. Basically, like you're like foosball players in a line. But that's another one that I've had families suggest to us. If you're looking for a couple of great website and a great graphic, I would recommend that you Google heart.org 25. These are great posters that you can have for your office for 25 ways to get moving at home. So American Heart came out with this just a couple months ago. It's a great little poster. AHA does wonderful work, and this is a really good one. A commercial site, if you're not already familiar with it, is check out gonoodle.com. GoNoodle has a lot of free activities and ideas for activities at home. Some great stuff. It's used a lot by families that have been homeschooling for a while, but a great website. Comes out of Nashville and very appropriate stuff. But the graphic, I'll just go back to it one more time. The best way to get that AHA one is if you Google heart.org 25, a great poster for your office or your waiting room, although people aren't in your waiting room very often or for very long anymore. We've noticed we've just had to put everything we want them to see, we have to just put them in the rooms. I'm sure you guys are experiencing the same thing. From our friends at Children's Mercy in Kansas City, I want to point out a website. It's called fitastic.org. If you go to fitastic.org, that's really all you got to remember is FITTASTIC.org. Then you go to the at-home resources. And what you're going to find at fitastic.org is a really, really nicely built out website with lots and lots and lots of material. Now, some of it is specific for Kansas City, which isn't real helpful if you're in Akron, but there's a lot that is not is not Missouri specific. So it's a great website. I was amazed when one of my colleagues nationally pointed this out to me. She was behind some of the development of the site, and it is really, really good. Great for schools. As you notice, what I highlighted here was their hyperlinked site for elementary and middle school children, but they have it for everything: preschool kids, adolescents. But it's a whole compendium of a ton of activities, books, games, ideas galore. Just great stuff at fitastic.org. It's part of their obesity treatment center. I'd also recommend, one of the things that I think has been a real theme for us, if there is a bright side to the pandemic, is that it has increased people's exposure to nature. One of the books that has been sort of out there for a number of years, Richard Louv and the Children in Nature movement. Last Child in the Woods is his book. It's a great book, and it really it just really talks about the importance of nature for obesity prevention, for behavior health, just a number of things. In Cincinnati, one of the things that we have is the Grow Outside Guide, and it's a zip coded guide to parks around the city. The reason I put this in here, obviously, it's great if you're in Southwestern Ohio, but it's also, to me, it's just a message that activity is most useful when it's accessible. You can't, it's kind of like, the diet that works for you is the diet that you can do. Same thing goes with activity. The park that's best for you is the one that you can access. And so I encourage you to look locally for physical activity. And there's a lot out there. The Metro Park system, the park systems that we have in Ohio are pretty outstanding. I'm going to wait one move here. The sun is kind of coming into view here in Cincinnati, so I'm going to make a little move here. There we go. That's a little bit better. Social activities, you know, for families, like looking for ways to kind of increase family time, increase and try to make the most of family time and not go crazy with too much family time. Certainly people recommended learning new skills, increasingly difficult card games, getting some of your kids into some of the games that you like as an adult, great opportunity. One family member said staying connected, not via Zoom, but learning to write letters and cards to family members and encouraging those family members, like grandparents, aunts, and uncles, to respond. Board games, obviously, learning YouTube, card tricks, magic tricks, skateboard tricks, making something for the backyard. This came from came from a pediatrician saying that he's actually teaching his daughter and son carpentry skills because they're building a treehouse. So a great opportunity there as well. You know, all these things, you know, when you look at this, it's like, oh my gosh, my family would never do this. My family would never do this. Why are you crazy? We're not going to go build a treehouse. You know what? This list is not meant to be for everybody. And you're not meant to use this prescriptively with parents. You're just to be open to ideas. And if people hit on things, those are great things to try with them. Making a family playlist of your favorite songs, recreating an old family photo, doing family book club, doing a scavenger hunt in the house, doing a family fashion show from different eras. The other possibility someone brought up is that, you know, this is an opportunity to go to church with other people around the country who you don't typically see. Everybody's services are online. It's an opportunity to do that. And you can usually do it on your own time schedule because most things are archived. You know, I think it's important as someone who is sort of a closet introvert. We all have different needs and we respond to the pandemic in different ways. Don't forget sometimes, you know, that, you know, some of our patients are not really suffering because they're fairly introverted and they're doing okay with things. It's important to make sure that everybody still has time by themselves to do their own thing. I think we assume that everybody is doing that, immersing themselves in screens, which isn't necessarily the best way to do your own thing, but certainly giving kids the opportunity to do independent play in other ways is helpful. And one of our parenting specialists said to us, you know, she said, one of the things that I think is really important is to stress with families that a pandemic does not mean that you have to clear everything off of your to-do list, which I think is some good advice. It doesn't mean that you have to do all these hyperactivity things. We don't have to be living like, you know, like Martha Stewart doing absolutely everything all at the same time. Some comments about mental health. First off, do we have any questions or comments in the chat box? Looks like we got one there.
Yeah.
Breakfast for dinner and a progressive dinner, different meal in different parts of the rooms, different rooms. Excellent idea. It's a great idea. I heard someone else say that. I never added that in here, was the progressive dinner. So let's talk about mental health. Continue to ask. I mean, certainly that was the gist of our of the statements, is that we should continue to ask about mental health. Rates of reported COVID-related stress approach 20% currently. Anxiety, depression, ADHD, all are going to have different expressions during the COVID epidemic. They're going to make it harder for them to diagnose. I don't know if you've all noticed this as well, is I'm being a little bit, you know, our behaviorists are being a little bit more lenient with saying like, okay, this child's going to need a little less ADHD med, this child's going to need a little bit more. We're kind of all over the place with this. You know, sometimes the school day lasts shorter. I've been noticing real changes, real shifts in stimulant medication prescriptions. And I think that's to be expected, honestly. An activity that someone brought up as a good mental health activity is journaling about COVID and making sure that they're talking about the bad and the good. You know, like trying to focus when you're trying to get through a really long haul like this. Gratitude can often get sort of lost along the way, and it's incredibly important for mental health. So, trying to figure out like, what are some positives that we can take away from this? Even though the whole thing overall just stinks, what can we do? What can we point to that maybe this is a little bit better? And kids need some help with doing that at times. They just need to be reminded. Kids are very optimistic, but they really respond to us. So I think being very clear with them and saying like, okay, let's talk a little bit about what the positive thing here is. And then the other piece of this too is, really, even though we're homeschooling this week and then not homeschooling next week, and then we're on blended the next week, and then an adapted schedule the next week, trying to keep structure with regard to eating time, with regard to sleep time, with regard to school time, with regard to off time is really important. So trying to keep as much of a schedule as possible is great. And some of our families, I mean, we all know, like listing all these things, you're going like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming for just about everybody. You don't have to do all these things, but I think of all the things we talk about, trying to help them come up with a schedule, a predictable schedule is one of the most important. And I don't care if they go on a scavenger hunt if they don't like scavenger hunts, but trying to keep the structure together is really important for kids and families. So keep those well visits going. Do not forget about mental health. Check out some of the resources we've given you, and please share other ones that you find. And stay in touch with us here at Ohio AAP. I've listed my email address here and also listed my cell phone. I'm more than happy to talk with anybody if you have ideas, but more than happy to kind of discuss at any point, and love to hear what other people have to share on this topic. Kind of a tough one, and we're all a little different, and we don't want to be prescriptive with our families, but we want to have a lot of tools in our toolbox and a lot of ideas that we can maybe help with.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bolling. There's a question for you. Are there any mobile apps that you recommend for families to use?
So yeah, there are some good mobile apps. Go Noodle's got a mobile app. The other one, I always love the Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime app. That's a great one. In terms of, it's interesting. It's that thing, like, the YouTube idea on like, do we use screen time in order to get more activity? I think you need to be careful with all of the apps, like, are these active apps? Are they less active apps? There's a whole variety of them out there. Trying to think of some of the other ones. I should have had more of those listed. I can get a list of those for folks. I didn't pull those up, and I will look for some of those.
That is great. That would be great, Dr. Bolling. And I can send that in a follow-up email too.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Bolling before I go over some of the P&P resources that we have available for you all? Oh, someone commented and said that they did obstacle courses in the house and
Yep.
outside with whatever they had around the house. So that's a great idea too.
It is a great idea. That's another one that I did not list, but that I've had other families say that to me as well.
Great. Well, while we're waiting for some more questions, if you all have any other comments or questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat box. We are glad that this information was useful, and I will include all of the information as well as the slides, P&P resources, the articles that Dr. Bolling suggested in a follow-up email. So you'll have all of that so you can go back and review. But I just wanted to go over a few of the P&P resources that we have. We have, like I said before, some handouts that are specific to different topics. So we have some on play, recognizing hunger and fullness cues, mealtime with a picky eater, as well as transitioning to solids, and then information split up by different ages too. All of this information is on our mobile app that you can download on the Google Play or Apple Store. And then you can, if you could fill out the survey to receive credit, and a certificate of attendance will also be sent to you. You can access that here, and I'll also put it in the chat box, and I will send it in the follow-up email too. We would love to hear your thoughts about the training, and if there's any additional topics that you're interested in hearing about. And my email address for Alex Miller, I'm the program manager for the Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime program. You can reach me here, as well as the phone number to reach me if you have any questions. And if there are any additional questions for Dr. Bolling, you can keep asking them in the chat box. But thank you everyone for joining us today. We want to thank the Ohio Department of Health again for their support with this project in these trainings. We're excited for all the rest of the trainings that we have coming up. So if you haven't registered for those, please go and register for those trainings. We still have 6 left, and the next one will be in January. And our PMP Toolkit and Journal Club are also launching in January as well. So if you're interested in having a copy of that or participating in the Journal Club, please sign up. You can also reach us on our different social media outlets listed here on this page. And we are excited to hear from you all in the future. Thank you so much, Dr. Bolling, for speaking today and sharing all that information. We really appreciate the time that you took to be with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week and a good weekend.